It's good to see everybody here. If you have your Bibles, go ahead and flip over to the book of Ezra. We'll be there for just about the whole time today. You also you want to go ahead and mark it, just because I know it takes a while to find it. Go find the book of Haggai while you're at it. It's one of those that we can skip over, but I promise it's in your Bible if you look hard enough. You just got to flip real slow. Find Haggai. So where we left off last week, just to kind of recap what all we've been talking about, we've been going through the book of Ezra, and we'll be going through Nehemiah when we get through this book. This is the story of the return of Israel after the Babylonian conquest. They've spent quite some time in Babylon, some 70 years, just as God predicted. And then God has allowed Israel, or a remnant of Israel, to return back to the land and rebuild and restore the home that they should have been inhabiting the whole time, except for their disobedience. And so Zerubbabel is the one that kind of heads up that mission. And last week we looked at Zerubbabel begins to rebuild. The first thing that they rebuild is what? The very first thing they rebuild. Not the temple, but close. The altar. And so they rebuild the altar first. And then last week we saw that they began the temple proper. And so the altar is kind of in the courtyard of the temple. If you think about where the tabernacle is and all that sort of thing back in the early old parts of the Old Testament. Then they lay the foundation for the temple. What's the response? How do people respond to the foundation? Yeah, you got some mixed reactions. You got some that are very excited because we were doing something good, and finally we have a temple again to worship God. And that's the attitude of the young people, because they're excited about the future that's lying ahead of them. And then you have the attitude of a lot of the old people that have endured those 70 years and remember Solomon's temple. And also the attitude of the Levites. I think that's kind of interesting. They see the foundations and they know what it should have been, what the glory of Solomon's temple was, and so they weep. And we left off last week. We didn't spend a lot of time looking at it, but in the book of Zechariah, chapter 8, and Zechariah, I think it's chapter 4, verses 8 through 10, I think. Zechariah rebukes the elders for their attitude. Haggai chapter 2, 2 through 9. Haggai says, why are you guys weeping? Because the glory of this second temple is going to be so much greater than the one of the first. And so they're rebuked for their attitude. They ought to have been happy that they have God has given them the opportunity to do something good, but they're not. Okay, so let's pick up chapter 4 where we left off. Now they're going to start building the temple. And you have some interesting things that happen. So pick up chapter 4, verses 1 and 2. Now when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the returned exiles were building a temple to the Lord, the God of Israel, they approached Zerubbabel and the heads of the fathers' houses and said to them, "Let us build with you, for we worship your God as you do. And we have been sacrificing to him ever since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here." And so Zerubbabel has a very tempting offer, right? Zerubbabel. This is a lot of work. Can you even imagine the amount of manpower that it would take to build a temple in a time without power tools, without cranes, without all the modern stuff that we have that makes construction so much easier than it has been in the past? This is an enormous task that they're undertaking. And here you have people that are willing and offering help. And so they say, we'll help you out. We worship God just like you. Zerubbabel is going to reject that offer. We'll look at that in just a second. But who are these people? Where are these people coming from? Who is this that approaches Zerubbabel? You have them identified in verse 1 as the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin. That's helpful for us as readers because we know that these people are going to be adversaries. You know, did they approach Zerubbabel and say, "Hi, we're adversaries"? You know, probably not. That's kind of as Ezra's writing this and recounting the story, he's giving you some commentary about what these people are going to be. And so for Zerubbabel, these people have not yet proven themselves to be adversaries. We know that they're going to be adversaries. Who are these people, though? Where are they coming from?
Coming out of Persia, didn't it?
People of the land.
Yeah, these are people that are already there. You're close, Pat, not quite Persians, but they are people that trace back their existence in the land to this figure, Esarhaddon, the king of Assyria. And so these are people that are not Jews, or at least not pure-blooded Jews, right? When you have the Assyrian conquest, as king of Assyria goes and he conquers who? He conquers the northern kingdom, right? And so you have all those 10 tribes up north, aside from Judah and Benjamin and some Levites. They're conquered and they're drug off into their own captivity before the Babylonian captivity. And part of what happens is the king of Assyria has this policy of, and this is something that's also mimicked by the Babylonians as well, of mixing and mingling peoples. And so you take some people from here and you transplant them over here, and you take some people from over there and you stick them back over there, and so you mix and mingle. The thought was that it's going to make, there are going to be some contentions between each other, and if they're fighting and can't get along and cooperate with each other, then they're not going to be fighting. And so that was kind of the thought process behind it. And so you see this king Esarhaddon also in the book of 2 Kings. Look at 2 Kings chapter 19. This is where he really makes his appearance. 2 Kings 19. Verse 36. Then Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, departed and went home and lived at Nineveh. And then, as he was worshipped in the house of Nisroch, his god, Adrimelech and Shalazar, his son, struck him down with the sword and escaped to the land of Ararat. And Esarhaddon, his son, reigned in his place. And so, when you think about the Assyrian conquest, you probably think of Sennacherib as the one that does that. He certainly is. There's an interesting writing that's been preserved by Sennacherib talking about his conquest of the Bible lands. And he says, I think he's talking about Hezekiah. And he says, "I locked him up like a bird in a cage." We essentially did. But he is assassinated by 2 of his sons. While he's worshiping his god, and a third son, Esarhaddon, takes his place as king. And so this is the generation that is being conquered by Assyria, maybe just slightly after that initial push. That's where these people have come to be relocated in Israel. Well, when you had the kingdom split, and you had the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, I think we're a lot more familiar with the southern kingdom, with Judah, and rightfully so. We're more familiar with some of those names and figures and places. What's the capital of the northern kingdom, if you remember? Where does when Rehoboam and Jeroboam, when they split, where does Jeroboam settle in the northern kingdom and make this his capital? Starts with an S. Samaria, yeah, Samaria. And so there's a region of Samaria, and then there's a city of Samaria, and these are the region, the city, all this area has been conquered by the Assyrians and now relocated. So keep that in mind as we get going through this a little bit. That's the land that we're talking about here. Flip back a page or two in 2 Kings chapter 17. And then look at, this is a little bit of a longer reading, but this is interesting, because I think this is essential to understanding Zerubbabel's actions here in a minute. You pick up verse 24. The king of Assyria, this is Sennacherib at this time, brought people from Babylon, from Cutha, Azza, Hamath, and Sepharvaim, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the people of Israel. And they took possession of Samaria and lived in its cities. And at the beginning of their dwelling there, they did not fear the Lord. Therefore, the Lord sent lions among them, which killed some of them. So the king of Assyria was told, "The nations that you have carried away and placed in the cities of Samaria do not know the law of the God of the land. Therefore, he has sent lions among them, and behold, they are killing them because they do not know the law of the God of the land." And the king of Assyria commanded, "Send there one of the priests whom you carried away from there, and let him go and dwell there and teach the people of the law of the God of the land." So one of the priests whom they carried away from Samaria came and lived in Bethel and taught them how they should fear the Lord. But every nation still made gods of its own and put them in shrines in the high places that the Samaritans had built, every nation in the cities in which they lived. The men of Babylon made Succoth-Benoth, the men of Cuth and made Nergal, and the men of Hamath made Ashna, and the Avites made Nibaz and Tartak, and this bunch of names. They burned their children in the fire to Adrimelech and Anamelech, the kings of Sepharim. And they also feared the Lord and appointed among themselves all sorts of people as priests and high places who sacrificed for them in the shrines and the high places. So they feared the Lord, but also served their own gods, after the manner of the nations from among whom they had been carried away. And to this day they do according to their former manner. They do not fear the Lord. They do not follow the statutes or rules of the laws and commandments that the Lord commanded the children of Jacob, whom he named Israel. And so you have this transplant that happens. People from Babylon and all these other nations around the area, they are put and relocated into Samaria. And they obviously do not follow God, and God sends lions, and there's this outcry that comes from them. And so the king says, okay, well, they're not following the God of that land. They're following their own gods of their own lands, but they don't know the God of that land. So let's have one of those priests that we've taken captive go and explain how to appease that God who's, in his mind, just the God of Israel, just the God of that land. And so they go and they learn the ways of God, but they also continue to follow after all their other gods. And so you flash forward some time, and now you have Zerubbabel and Ezra, and all these people. Verse 10 is going to tell you that these are people that have settled in Samaria. All these people are coming to Zerubbabel and saying, "Hey, we'll help you build this temple. We worship God just like you do." Do they? No, of course not. You can't worship God and Baal. You can't worship God and these Molechs that they're worshiping, or whatever these other gods that are. And so Zerubbabel understands the situation. And so his response in verse 3 is Zerubbabel, Jeshua, and the son, and the rest of the heads of the fathers' houses in Israel said to them, "You have nothing to do with us in building a house to our God, but we alone will build it to the Lord God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, has commanded us." And so Zerubbabel turns down their all because he respects the commandments of God. Right?
Amen.
Isn't that what it boils down to? That he understands that these people are not doing what they should do. That their worship is not proper worship. That God has commanded certain things of his people, and that these people are not living up to that, and they're not children of Jacob in the same sense. By the way, these people are probably, we talk a lot about the Samaritans in the New Testament as being, almost half-breeds of the Jews with the peoples of Assyria and Babylon and all that. That's who we're talking about here. This is probably, more likely than not, this is before they really form their identity as Samaritans, a distinct group. This is the people that's going to become the Samaritans. And so this is going to have a really lasting impact on the relationship between Jews and Samaritans. And there's going to be a lot of hard feelings. The Samaritans, I think, are being genuine here. They think that they worship God just like they do. Perhaps there's some ignorance, but Zerubbabel says, no, we're not going to do that. This is our God, and we're not going to allow this to happen. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you think that there was malice involved in the heart of those that offered the help? And part two of the question is, was there such thing as proselytizing them? That doesn't seem very evangelistic.
Yeah.
If you think about
Yeah. Yeah. So, one, I don't know their motives. Maybe they are being intentional, or maybe they are being sincere in their offer to help. I tend to think that they perhaps are.
What's interesting, verse 4, they sure changed quickly though.
Yeah.
I would say
We help you now to discourage them, so that gives you some doubt.
Yeah. Well, why might they have that kind of flip? It's because these people, we've lived here for 70 years, and they're coming back. They're going to be kicking us out. And so maybe that's why this is their attempt to make peace and to kind of join their ships together, and then it's turned down. And so, well, we're going to get you out of here. I think that's what's probably happening. One second, Colby. As far as the proselytizing, you can proselytize. You have Ruth is an example of a proselyte. She's a Moabite. And then she comes and she marries Boaz. She becomes a Jewish woman. Proselytism is not something that's highly recommended in the Old Testament. You have a law for the Gentiles, and you have a law for the Jews. I think sometimes when we talk about the Old Testament, we think that God had no plans or no standards for Gentiles. I don't think that's true. By becoming a proselyte, you're taking on a much more difficult law upon yourself. And even today...
that would have been mass proselytizing.
Yeah.
Which was a big word.
Yeah, yeah.
But I just think about it in the context of today, and I have a couple of notes that reminded me just to ask that question.
Yeah.
About cooperation in denominations.
Sure.
And how that relates to cooperation with denominations today. Somewhat, it's a reach, I know. But there are some elements there that should be at least discussed or addressed when you are finding yourself with an opportunity. I guess that's what we would call it today.
Yeah, I do think there's some parallels, and there's some lessons about fellowship lines, I think.
Yes,
Yeah.
very good.
Yeah, Colby?
Why did God leave those people in, like, I thought He wiped them all out in the promised land? I heard on a history documentary that He let those people in there so that the people of Israel would be able to learn to fight, because the other ones were the only ones in there.
Yeah, so, the conquest happened quite a long time before this.
Yeah.
But there's, while Israel goes off to Egypt, God allows the Canaanites to build and all that, to kind of keep the land prepared for them, it seems. But you have some long-lasting some consequences. Go back to that in just a second, but, talking about the fellowship lines, Zerubbabel is not willing to compromise in an effort to appease people. There's an easy way and there's a hard way here, right? The easy way is, we can use all the help we can get. This is a huge task that's been put before us, and if you're willing to help, we'll use you. That would have been the easy path, right? But that's also the path of compromise, because God's law is God's law. These people are not living in accordance with God's law. And so, to then join your ship to them is a compromise in your own morality, in your own purity. Do we do that today? How often do we take the easy path rather than the better, difficult path as a church? What are some areas that we choose to take, and not necessarily us individually, but religious world broadly speaking, choose to take the easy path?
It's easier to not say nothing against sin than it is to teach against it.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's a lot of people that compromise morality because it's so much easier to not have those fights, right? It's so much easier to be inclusive and to not offend people, and so we're just going to compromise morality and clear teaching for popularity.
There's an element of choosing the easy road as it pertains to buffeting your body, physically as well. That can be very broad as far as, feeling tired or gluttony or not fasting as instructed in Scripture, or the different things that are physically difficult. Sometimes take the easy road there. We think.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and that's one that you gotta step on some toes. But Paul says, "I discipline my body so that I'm not left. I'm not counting all of this for nothing." That's definitely a good point. I think sometimes we compromise in leadership. How many churches are doing things leadership-wise that are not approved? Putting in elders that are not qualified to be elders because we have to have somebody be an elder. Or I know what Paul says about women leadership in the Bible and male headship, but we don't have a lot of good qualified men, so we got a lot of godly women. Let's put some women in the eldership. Or what about churches that want worship to be more pleasing to the people than it is to God, and so they compromise there for the sake of popularity and whatever that might be. And so there's a lot of areas where I think we struggle with this. But for one reason or another, Zerubbabel, I think, rightly says, no, we're going to pass. And this is the beginning of some long-lasting hostility between the Jews and the Samaritans. Interesting enough, I don't know if you know this, but Samaritans still exist. There's still two primary cities in Israel where you have Samaritans. And they still go up on Mount Gerizim, and they still worship up there, and they still make sacrifices, and they still have a priesthood, and they have their own high priest, and all these sorts of things. I think that's the high priest on the right of the Samaritans, the current high priest. There they are making a sacrifice. It's a ox or goat or something, I don't know. And there they are on Mount Gerizim doing their thing. And so what the Samaritans are going to do is they're going to, because they're not welcomed back into the proper restoration of the Jewish religion, what they end up doing is they make their own version of it. And so they take many of the things that are in the Old Testament and they just twist it. They make changes to the Old Testament. They reject everything after the books of Moses. And they see, particularly they don't like Eli for whatever reason. They see Eli as a great corrupter. And they change some things like it's not on Mount Zion, where they've been instructed to do all these things, it's on Mount Gerizim, all that. But anyway, they still exist today. There's not many of them, and they're, in about 100 years, there probably won't be any left, just because there's population. Yeah. Yeah, there's a population crisis, and so when you're only allowed to marry within your own group, you're going to have some issues, and they've got some. It probably won't exist much longer. But so after that, you have. We're going to have just a reminder of the time frame. So Zerubbabel 536. You're going to have some time skipping that's about to happen. A time skip forward to around the time of Nehemiah. And so 465, 445, somewhere in that area, you're going to have some time skipping that's going to happen. So pick up with me in verses 4 through 5. So there's going to be some immediate pushback and some immediate hostility that happens. Verse 4. Then the people of the land discouraged the people of Judah and made them afraid to build, and bribed counselors against them to frustrate their purposes all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. And so you're going to have some immediate challenges that arise. They go and appeal to the people that are in charge. And they make bribes against the people that have authority to make life difficult for these people coming back to rebuild. And so they threaten them. And, I think it's interesting. Bribes are made. Even though the people have returned back to the promised land and they're rebuilding the temple, they are still not free, right? They're still under the rule of somebody else. And so they're still under the threat of some other power. And what we're going to see is that because of these threats, these immediate threats, they're going to stop building. Then you have a little time skip. Sometimes when you read or watch TV shows, you may have like time skips. You got flashbacks, and sometimes you have flash forwards. And if you watch Lost, you have flash sideways. It gets real confusing in Lost. But you have a flash forward here. And so in Ezra 4, 6 through 23, the way you know that is look at who's king. In the reign of Ahasuerus, that's remember Esther, in the beginning of his reign, they wrote an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. We'll skip through this just because it's very long. But there comes a time, almost 100 years later, where there's still these hostilities, and these Samaritans are still not happy. And they say, look at verse 16. We know that we have made known to the king that if this city is rebuilt and its walls finished, well, Zerubbabel's not building walls. This is a reference to Nehemiah. And its walls finished, you will then have no possession in the province beyond the river. And so they are writing this letter to the king saying, hey, you got to stop these guys because Jerusalem's a rebellious city, and if you let them rebuild and you let them restore this building, this city, then you're going to have a problem on your hands, and they're going to rise up against you. And so the king says, we got to stop this. Why should, verse 22, take care not to be slack in this matter. Why should damages grow to hurt the king? And so there's this threat of force that's made against them. In the days of Nehemiah, so this is a flash forward. And then you have verse 24. You have back to present time for Zerubbabel. Then the work on the house of God that's in Jerusalem stopped. And it ceased until the second year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia. And so the builders give in to the threat, and they cease to work. Real fast, I guess we got time. Ezra chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. instead of 3. Now the prophets Haggai and Zechariah, the son of Iddo, prophesied to the Jews who were in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of God of Israel who was over them. Then Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Jeshua, the son of Jozadak, arose and began to rebuild the house of God that's in Jerusalem, and the prophets of God were with them and supporting them. We don't have time to get into this like I wanted to today. We'll get into it next week. But this is, the work has stopped. And it's while the work has stopped that you have the writings of the book of Haggai and the writing of the book of Zechariah. These are people, this is where they fit in exactly on the timeline. And they write, and the books that we have preserved are the words that they're telling the Israelites here, the returned Jews. And so their messages, the messages of those books, are going to be directly important to what's happening right now. And Haggai is going to mention that 16 years has passed, and you guys have not been building. You've let the work go, lay untouched. 16 years. And you guys have an issue of priority. You're building your own houses, but yet the house of God's laying in shambles. You guys have got to get this together. We'll look at that a little bit more next week. We'll start back here, but at the end, their message is going to be received, and after 16 years, they're going to start rebuilding once again. And so, that's a good place to stop. We got 2 minutes. Any thoughts, questions in the last minute or so?
I don't know how new the dig was, but they found some Assyrian work
Yeah.
that showed 185,000 in the verse preceding that you read about Sennacherib. Basically proving what the Bible said all along.
Yeah. Yeah, there's been some really interesting archaeological discoveries about Sennacherib. It's the Sennacherib prison, I think. I don't know. But there's been a lot of discoveries related to that that are pretty interesting. But, all right. Thank you guys. Next week we'll pick up chapter 5 and try and cover a little bit more